Mel Stride, for the first time in almost 60 years, you won in a by-election in Scotland. But on the same night, you barely scraped 2% of the vote in Makerfield. What happened?
Well, these are two different situations. Like Makerfield has been a socialist part of the country, deeply so for
socialist, that's a bit extreme.
Over 100 years. Well, socialism is
Vote,
extreme.
Labour voting.
That's the problem. But Labour voting, OK. So we knew we were never going to be in contention in that kind of area. Even in 2019, at the height of the kind of red wall, that red wall election where we did so well, we weren't in real contention in that particular part of the country. The real story there, I think, Trevor, is how disappointingly Reform did, despite the fact that they threw the kitchen sink at that elections. And I think the question has to be asked now what the trajectory of Reform is. They've come off from a kind of polling high back in the autumn now, several points, and I think their position is softening. But on Aberdeen, you're absolutely right.
So.
Aberdeen South
I think that's a kind of optimistic way of reading Makerfield. Actually, in 2019, if I understand it rightly, you got about a third of the votes in Makerfield. You're down to 2% this week, but Reform actually got a little bit more than a third of the vote. I mean, they basically ate your lunch in Makerfield.
I think the point that I was going to go on to make is that we now live in a world in which tactical voting is increasingly important. And what matters in a tactical voting world is not just where you are in the poll in terms of popularity, but how many people are prepared to vote tactically against you when the opportunity arises. And that is a problem that Reform has. They are increasingly toxic amongst an increasingly large proportion of the population. And I think in the first past the post system across seats in this country at a general election, that will be a major problem for them. Now, in Aberdeen, of course, as you say, great result. It's the first by-election victory for the Conservative Party in Scotland since 1967. And what that demonstrated is that when you start with first principles, as we do as a party, you look carefully at the things that the country really needs, such as energy security, such as jobs, such as energy prices getting under control and so on, and you communicate that effectively to the electorate, then you can get the kind of result that we saw there. And quietly in the background, Trevor, we're also seeing various council by-elections going on. There were two this week in Essex, where the Conservatives took seats from Reform. Okay. As people are seeing Reform in government at the local level, they are beginning to turn often back to the Conservatives.
I want to come back to talking about the Conservative Party, but of course the news this morning is about the Labour Party and Andy Burnham's return to Westminster and whether that might presage a change in Number 10. Now, you guys know more than anybody probably in history about getting rid of leaders and changing prime ministers and so on and so forth. Peter Kyle, the business secretary, said to us this morning he'd had a frank conversation with the prime minister. Can you interpret what that means?
Well, it sounds like it means what a lot of Keir Starmer's colleagues are doing, which is to basically tell him that his time is up. But look, I don't want to intrude on the grief of the Labour Party.
No, but you've got lots of experience of what happens in these situations.
Well, I think what will...
Because you've junked, what, 3-4 of them?
Yeah, but look, the only reason why you should get into a position of changing a leader is if you think that will fundamentally change something to the benefit of the country. And on the first point about fundamentally change anything, it won't. Because the problem that Labour has is that they are addicted to debt, borrowing, taxing, destroying businesses and so on, and with a backbench Labour Party in Parliament that's not prepared to take the tough decisions, particularly on welfare, to get people off benefits and into work. So we can do things like fund our defence, for example, in an increasingly challenging and uncertain and dangerous world. That will not change by a change of leadership.
Oh, yeah, but actually... Let's be honest, if we can, nobody's watching. You'd prefer to have Starmer there, wouldn't you, rather than a man who took 55% in a by-election on Thursday night?
Look, with Andy Burnham in particular, this is somebody who's flip-flopped all over the place. You've seen it even in this
by-election. Yeah, but the electors apparently like his flip-flopping.
He doesn't apparently understand what the fiscal rules are. He said rather foolish things about the bond markets in the past. The markets are watching. And I think Andy Burnham taking over...
You could say all that, but he's a winner. He's a winner, and that's your problem, isn't it?
Look, there's a huge difference between winning a by-election and indeed being the mayor of Greater Manchester, a wonderful and important position though that is, and being Prime Minister of our country with all the decisiveness and decisions and sense of direction that you need, and the kind of qualities that I have to say Kemi Badenoch has been showing, which is why she is now the most popular of all the leaders of the political parties, and why, for example, on the economy, we are ahead of all the other political parties in terms of that critical question about who do you trust on the economy. More people say the Conservatives than any other party. And that's because we know what we're doing. We're grown up, we're doing the hard work, we're doing the hard yards, doing the research and coming up with the answers with a plan behind those.
This is a very interesting point. Your party leader is the least unpopular party leader right now. And if the party reflected that, actually you'd be doing much better. But you aren't. You're still something like 10% down on reform. Surely the question you've got to deal with is how does the Conservative Party get back to being the senior party on the right of politics? And even if people do like your leader, actually the party is an albatross around her neck. You're still not trusted.
So, Trevor, well, on the economy, we are trusted more than any other party out there, OK? So that's simply not true on the general issue of trust. We've got 3 years now to a general election. That is a lifetime in politics, particularly when politics is so volatile. Things can and I believe will change. And the reason they'll change is you have a Labour Party that is palpably making big mistakes around the economy. You have
you want to talk about the Labour Party.
Reform. No, but I'm coming on to us. I'm coming to us. I'm framing your question. So
I can frame my question.
Okay, well,
why don't you just answer it?
I am. With reform, you've got a party that is prepared to go out there and make all sorts of unfunded promises that are totally irresponsible and unbelievable. And where we fit in is we have to be the grown-ups in the room that do the hard work, do the real deep thinking about the difficult challenges that we face, come up with answers that are fully funded and are fiscally responsible, particularly on the economy, and that's exactly what we're doing. And that is why, in the polls, more people are trusting the Conservatives on the economy than any other party.
If you're doing
that is what will bring us through.
If you're doing all this deep strategic thinking and you are going to come up with great policies and all of that, why is the first thing that your leader's been saying this morning after Makerfield that you will never do a deal with reform? Surely it's sensible to decide what you're going to offer to the electorate before you decide who you might or might not work with.
Because we already know two things. One is that reform are economic fantasies. The numbers never add up. They had £140 billion worth of unfunded commitments and tax cuts and so on in their manifesto.
Speaking as a party of Liz Truss, I don't think you got a finger to point.
As chair of the Treasury Select Committee at the time, Trevor, I had a lot to say about that before it happened, when it happened and after it happened. So I've been very consistent on that. But I lay the same charge, turbocharged version of that charge against reform. The numbers do not add up. And seemingly, they don't seem to care about that. They just simply think that if you go out and promise the earth to everybody, somehow that's going to be enough. Well, it isn't responsible. And the second thing is this point about toxicity. Why would we want to get in bed with a party that is going to continuously get hammered by tactical voting because an increasingly large proportion of the electorate do not like populist politics?
OK. Reform's made a lot of noise about defections from the Tories. If what you say is right, it's logical that what's going to happen next 2 or 3 years is that some people who have gone to reform will be coming back to you, councillors, ex-MPs and so on. If some disillusioned reform members want to rejoin the Tories or join the Tories, will you accept them?
Well, that's a matter for the party leader.
But you personally, how would you feel about it?
That is purely a matter for Kemi, and of course you cannot, generalise on the basis of who might be coming forward. So
you would open the door.
Well, we'll have to see. Look, at the end of the day, we are seeing people. There was a local councillor recently who's come back to and left reform and says that he's very sorry they left in the first place, and he was sold all sorts of lies about what reform were, and then he saw them close up in the way that they work in local government. He doesn't want to have anything more to do with it, and we will see probably increasing examples of that. But it will be a case-by-case basis, and it will be for Kemi to take those decisions, not for me.